Thank you, Sam. Yes, I will continue with this item. And as Sam already mentioned, this is already at step 7. So most of everything has already been agreed to in this draft. Next slide, please. So there's a bit of statistics here. We just want to look at the consumption volume and the imports and exports of cassava in the region. So if we look at the tons produced in the region, such as that in Australia and Oceania, that's a pretty significant number over there. Fiji also shows a very high amount of its consumption value. And if we look into Papua New Guinea, they've also showed a really significant amount as well. So I think this highlights where we can see who's going to be mostly impacted with this item on cassava. So with New Zealand, the values shows in terms of consumption and import values are also significant as well. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this analysis was done on the basis of a market size. Though it is a bit old, it shows Papua New Guinea, Fiji, and Micronesia, and also Tonga, to an extent that the production size is to be significant. Next slide, please. When we look at exports,
you want me to move to exports? This is exports.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we look at exports, Fiji and Tonga shows here to be very big exporters of cassava, and so as I mentioned, this is important to know who might be impacted by this. Yes, next slide, Sam, please. For the imports here, we see that Australia and New Zealand are two of the most cassava import countries. And I think I may assume that it's because of most of our relatives are there as well. Among others as well. Yes, next slide, please. So just a brief introduction on cassava. Cassava is a good food alternative. It is local and indigenous to some countries, and it is gluten-free and classified as a low glycemic index food. So it is attractive to some of the food nutritionists out there. It is also a good food source alternative for people with celiac disease. Next slide, please. For cassava, there are 2 types of considerations, which are the cassava peel, usually given as animal feed, so the brown stuff over there, and the white stuff inside, or what we call the cassava meat, which is used for the human consumption. So there was a highlight that this item is focusing on the part for human consumption. Yep. Next slide, please. And here are some derivatives of the cassava. Used for food, cassava desserts, cassava bread, cassava flour, cassava chips. I'm sure some of you have already had some of these. Next slide, please. So why is this an issue, and why it needs a code of practice? Basically, some total diet studies showed that aflatoxin and ochratoxin frequently found in cassava and in cassava-derived food. So they decided to discuss for a code of practice to be developed. And this was approved in CAC 44 as new work. And basically it was clarified in 2021 that we are not dealing with the feed, but the white stuff. In CCCF16, there was the advancement of the code of practice to step 5, adopted at step 5 as a draft standard, and now it is coming back to the committee as at step 7 for consideration. Next slide, please. So what the code of practice provides, it looked at the good agricultural practices. It also looked at the good manufacturing practices. It looked at good storage practices and also good distribution practices. Next slide, please. What they try to see is where can we apply the best practices. They look at types of processes and conditions required. Are there critical parameters which can be applied to better control the occurrence of mycotoxin? Are there storage conditions that can reduce the growth of mycotoxin? And of course, they also looked at education and personal hygiene measures as well. So this is the structure of the code of practice for cassava. Next slide, please. Some of, so majority of the comments received, people were supportive of the code of practice, and some suggested to add human consumption to the title. This is from Thailand. EU suggested that we should not be considering only for aflatoxin reduction and ochratoxin, but we should also include fumonisin as well. However, there are some debate on this because there doesn't seem to be significant occurrence of fumonisin in cassava. So there's a need for confirmation for this. Some suggested to have a review of the classification of bitter and sweet cassava roots according to the current classification of cassava in the Codex. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I think this is where we need to identify if this is something that is already practiced by the industry of the region. So we can look at the recommendations for the Southwest Pacific. Do we consider this to be good for the industry of the region as well? If yes, we can consider to support the adoption of the draft at step 8. But there's a need to analyze whether our producers in the region are following these practices. So yes, I think that's the end of the slide for this one, Sam. Am I right?
Yes, that's this is the last slide. Absolutely. So we are really at the end here. I mean, again, based on the comments that were received, as Annalise indicated, it seemed that the document was technically sound. And the overwhelming level of comments seems to support really moving ahead with this one. But again, given that the region is one of the producing regions, if there are any things that may need to be considered, even though, again, at this stage, it's kind of quite late to be involved in with some changes because we are already at step 7. So basically, most of the standard has been approved. Given that it was approved as a draft standard at step 5. But nonetheless, there is still an opportunity to make comments at the committee, including through a CRD, an introduction of a CRD, or any type of comments that could be developed right now. So maybe we'll pause here a few minutes, and I don't know if others. Thanks very much, Annalise, for this great review, and Ruth, Scott, Ken, colleagues from all other jurisdictions, if you have any comments on this item.
guess I could make a quick comment. Thanks, Annalise. That was a great overview of this agenda item. I think for us, really, obviously it's near the end, but I mean, my colleague, we're a team of 2 for this contaminant committee meeting. We would welcome any, like, obviously feedback, because we aren't aware of what this would mean in practice for the producers, and so I think any insights into, I guess, the feasibility of some of these things happening in your regions would be really helpful.
Yeah, and the United States has a similar position. I mean, we feel this can go for final adoption. The delegate must make a few comments, they normally do, unless, of course, our friends in the Pacific have a problem with it. So, but otherwise, we're fine with it.
Sorry. Just adding a comment. I think for us here in Tonga, because our cassava export is currently literally happening outside here in our pack house, and for us, just moving it to step 8 would also be a good thing, because it's good to have something on paper that we can look into when we do our exports. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, so this is great. If there are no other comments, I think these were really the items. Yeah, I see that Eresi is also mentioning no major comments from Kiribati. Just continuing to support the ongoing work on this. So thanks, thank you, Kiribati, for that input. So again, I mean, the agenda item of CCCF is much larger than this. We've selected really these items simply, for the time. I mean, this is also our first attempt to do an analysis of the agenda items as a Codex roundtable for the Southwest Pacific. Hopefully, in upcoming discussions, we'll be able to review the agenda even more, and even actually more ahead of time, knowing that now the committee is taking place next week. But again, this gives you an idea about the way we can tackle some of these items. Next week, there will be other items also that will be subject to consideration. There are some discussions around basically sampling plans and maximum levels for mycotoxins in spices that will be continuing. There, I think actually from the cursory review of the information, I think essentially the maximum level seems to be, for the most part, okay to suggest, but there might be some questions about the sampling plans. I mean, I don't know if you are sampling, if you're having spices and you're proposing to sample 10 kilograms of something that costs a fortune, I think it might be causing some issues for international trade, but these are things that might be, subject to discussion. I guess I looked at those even from just a common sense standpoint, if you will, not even actually from a statistical overview there. So there are a few things that will be subject to debate. So it's generally not a boring committee, let's put it this way. But then again, I'm biased because I'm a chemist.
Yeah, same here, Sam. I was just a few. I think I already asked you that question when we were in Auckland, with the how we always go with the heavy metals and mycotoxins, especially in ready-to-eat foods. But there are the principles and guidelines for microbiological criteria. We Codex do not really use that, or I've been reading that, but I'm not really sure. I tried, because we do the test here, but when it comes to microbiology tests, it's a bit complicated when I try to read the guidelines, especially for microtest.
Okay. I guess, I mean, the risk management approaches are slightly, I mean, you're using general principles that are the same, but there are still principles that are geared more to manage the biological agents as hazards. And basically the difference is the fact that a biological agent is not something that is static, it's dynamic, it can continue to grow. it is actually much more influenced by the process than chemicals. Not that chemicals are not influenced, they can be, and particularly mycotoxins. You know, when you do some processing, you may have some changes on the occurrence or the prevalence of the hazard. But for biologics, definitely the process will have an impact, because depending on whether you apply an inactivation approach, etc.
Yeah.
So essentially, the risk assessment is a little bit different when you conduct it for microbiology than when you conduct it for chemistry, and that's why you have different risk management approaches that can be applicable. Now, that being said, for microbiology as well, even though you rely on numbers much less than you do for chemistry, you may have what we call sentinel levels, and Codex has established some values that could be used in order to basically control some biological agents. The example is what Codex developed for listeria in ready-to-eat foods, and and basically some values that would be considered for listeria, growth promoting products versus non-listeria growth promoting products, because depending on the food, you have different types of environment. So Codex still did some of that, but again, given that the agent has different characteristics, the risk assessment is different, therefore the risk management approach would somewhat differ. And that's, of course, that's what the Committee on Food Hygiene does. So the Committee on Food Hygiene does a lot, really, prevention approaches. So we focus a lot on how to prevent either the introduction or the proliferation of the biological agent.
Agents. All right. Yeah, I think it's kind of clear, because like most of the food, like for example, cassava, like there's heavy metals already contained in them. So, oh yeah, no, I think I understand. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Sam.
Not a problem. Thank you, Jocelyn.